Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We'd like to give attendees a few moments to join the session before we begin. For those who have just joined us, welcome. We're very excited about today's discussion, which will commence shortly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sofia Perez. I'm an active member of the World Compliance Association, and I'm pleased to be facilitating today's discussion. We have many business leaders, compliance professionals, and product owners in our audience today, and I'd like you to consider these questions. Why are governments worldwide rapidly implementing age verification requirements while simultaneously facing significant technical, legal, and privacy challenges in enforcement? This is certainly a compelling question, and we're very pleased to have 4 expert panelists with us today to help us navigate this rapidly evolving space. Before I introduce our expert panelists, let me cover some quick housekeeping items. All attendees will remain muted throughout the session, but you're welcome to engage with us via the chat box or the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session after our panel discussion. Please submit your questions using the Q&A tab, and we'll address as many as possible. The webinar recording will be made available to all attendees within a few days and can also be found on our YouTube channel along with our other webinars. Having said this, I'd like to introduce you to Ian Corby, Executive Director of the Age Verification Providers Association, the global trade body for suppliers of technology for online age checks, wider age assurance, and parental consent solutions. Ian is also Secretary General of UE Consent, a nonprofit facilitating interoperable age assurance, and sits on the UK government's expert panel on age verification.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ian. We will have Michael Murray. He's head of regulatory strategy, working within the Regulatory Futures Directorate at the Information Commissioner's Office. He leads the development of the Eco Children's Code, formerly known as the Age Appropriate Design Code, focusing on engagement with Internet Society Services, regulators, and civil society organizations in the UK and internationally, and the development of guidance to deliver the Children's Code ambitious transition plan commitments. Alan Good is the CEO and Chief Analyst at Good Intelligence, a respected expert in identity, authentication, and biometrics, and has written a number of publications on these subjects. Prior to setting up Good Intelligence, Alan spent over 20 years in business where he held positions for organizations such as T-Mobile UK, Dollaroo, Motorola, Citibank, and Atos Origin. Tom Gadsden is the Vice President of Product Management at Shufti, where he leads the design of identity verification and fraud prevention technologies. He brings over a decade of experience in product leadership roles across fintech and cybersecurity, having previously worked with global platforms focused on digital identity and compliance. Thank you all for joining us today. And to kick things off, Ian, you have a unique perspective on the global regulatory landscape. Could you walk us through the most significant developments you're seeing in 2024 and 2025, and which jurisdictions are leading the charge?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to Shufti for having me here today. I think we're seeing a tsunami of legislation around the world. And it's hard to sort of say which jurisdiction is really in the lead on this question. But I'll just start close to home here in the UK. The Online Safety Act came into force with a vengeance just in July, when the complete requirement for social media as well as adult sites and even gaming sites to use age assurance, highly effective age assurance was the standard set by Ofcom, came into force. And our members were doing around 10 million age checks on a daily basis from when that began to be required. We've also got the Digital Services Act, which is effective across the whole of the European Union. And for the very large platforms, that's enforced directly by the Commission. So we're no longer reliant on local regulators in Cyprus, for example, to enforce what was the regulations before that, like the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, where it was very slow in implementing it. We're now seeing the Commission being very proactive and beginning investigations into platforms which aren't properly protecting children. And then in the US, lots of states took action about adult sites. 24 US states now require age verification for adult content. That was slightly on hold until we got a result from the Supreme Court recently in the Paxton versus Free Speech Coalition case, which said it was not protected as free speech and that you could require age verification to prevent children seeing adult content online. And then sort of most topical at the moment would be Australia, where in December they will be bringing in a requirement for a minimum age for social media of 16. So that is a sort of a new development in the sense that the age verification industry is now having to consider how it can check at the age of 16 rather than just the age of 18, which is has been the general requirement in other jurisdictions to date, at least in terms of what's being enforced. So there are other countries I could mention. Brazil's just passed a law requiring age verification. India has a big data protection requirement for adults, which means you've got to check somebody's an adult before they can give consent to having their data shared. Malaysia, Singapore, so plenty else. But yeah, lots going on.
Well, it sounds like this is an international trend that is here to stay. So based on your expertise, what patterns are you seeing across different regions? Are we moving toward global harmonization or regional divergence in age verification approaches?
Well, there's good news and bad news. I'd say it's about as bad as it can get right now, but we are working towards a better situation. So we were conscious that different jurisdictions were passing different laws. And so we figured out one of the best ways to try to get some alignment was using international standards, because this is things that people understand and apply around the world. So there's a good international infrastructure to share those standards and to audit and certify people against them. So we started with a BSI, what they call a PAS, specification 1296. That was back as long ago as 2018. We then created an IEEE standard last year, 2089.1, which was on age verification, and the ISO standard on a framework for age assurance, 27566, will finally come into force next month. And that's probably obviously the gold standard in terms of an international standard that everybody could comply with. So that will hopefully allow us to then negotiate with people who are passing legislation or the regulators who are then developing the detail around it to say, could you please just point to these standards? And at least as a sort of underlying baseline requirement for everybody, they should be compliant to those standards. And then you can add on the specific requirements for each particular jurisdiction. But the nightmare is in the United States alone, 50 states, each of which could have a different requirement for vaping products, for alcohol, for adult content, for sharing data. You could end up with 200 different regimes in just one country. And clearly that's not going to be efficient for anybody involved. We're also seeing continued arguments about where best to do age assurance. Obviously, to date, we've been looking at the publisher doing it. Some people are making the argument that we ought to try and get that done on the device or at the App Store level. There is some logic to that, but there are some drawbacks around that as well. And one of the main stumbling blocks is really around liability. Apple and Google, who run the app stores, do not want to become the age verification provider to the world and take all the liability if that goes wrong. They are, however, coming forward with some alternatives. So Google is offering to allow you to put a credential in your wallet and then share through zero knowledge proof the age from that. But Google isn't going to stand behind that credential. It will be whoever creates the credential who's guaranteeing that age. Meanwhile, Apple is taking an approach where the parent puts the age into the App Store on behalf of their child, which is fine unless you are legally compelled to keep kids off your site, in which case you're then reliant on parents not telling a fib, not allowing their kids to be aged up older than they really are, because that would leave you non-compliant and subject to enforcement action. So, it's a different process, really. That's more of a parental consent process rather than an independent age verification. And then we're also seeing the advent of government digital identities, such as the European Digital Wallet and mobile driver's licenses in the US. There's a cultural question, I think, there as to whether people want to use a government-issued key as their key to the internet. So there's a lot of issues in this area. We're just focused on solving the problem today, and we're doing quite well with having done over 1 billion checks in the last year, doing it through the age verification process.
Great, thank you, Ian. Certainly, age assurance regulation is no longer limited to the UK. We're seeing frameworks emerge in many jurisdictions. And now, I would like to ask Michael. Michael, organizations are now operating under both the Eco Children's Code and the Online Safety Act, one focused on privacy and the other on harmful content. Can you give us a real example on how a company might get hit with penalties from both regulators for the same issue? What should compliance teams be watching out for right now?
Oh, thanks, Sofia. To date, I'm not aware of any company being hit by both regulators, so that's good news anyways. It is conceivable that one organization could be non-compliant with age assurance related rules across both pieces of legislation, however. I'll give you an example. A social media service that allows children to access it, so it falls within Ofcom's Children's Access Assessment rules, but also has a terms of service of 13 plus, for example, in the UK, which would potentially this social media service include some pornography or other user-generated content that is a priority content for Ofcom. That could run into trouble with Ofcom if it failed to put harmful content behind a highly effective age assurance gate. If that service was also processing the personal information of its users, including children, for example, behavioral profiling for content recommendations, data collection for and sharing for ad tech purposes, and that service processed their data under consent or, in Europe, a legitimate interest lawful basis, then it is possible that the processing of the under 13's personal information would be unlawful in the case of the GDPR, but also not be compliant with the Online Services, the Online Safety Act. So compliance teams then, if in this sort of scenario or in any scenario where they're under the law, operating under the law in the UK, should undertake, first of all, their child access assessments, or for the ICOs likely to be access assessments, undertake a risk assessment for both regulators, and then complete a data protection impact assessment. Services need to know if children are accessing the platforms to apply the protections that the OSA and the UK GDPR require those services. A service can have great default settings in place, but if children self-declare an age of 18 or over, they won't benefit from those protections. So age assurance plays a critical role in ensuring that the service is age appropriate, is lawful, and it's compliant with both the online safety and the data protection regulations in the UK.
Thank you, Michael. For UK companies operating internationally, can you tell us what's the risk if they don't apply decode, the children's code standards to their global operations? Are you seeing cases where UK regulators are scrutinizing how these companies handle children's data overseas?
Yeah, the UK regulators are concerned with the provision of services to children in the UK. So for the ICO, that means any organization that falls within scope of Article 3 of the UK GDPR. So it would cover those services that operate in the UK, but not wouldn't cover services that or the delivery services in another jurisdiction. It's up to the data protection authorities in those jurisdictions to uphold the laws related to their residents and people in those areas. Where we do find GDPR breaches in overseas companies operating in the UK, then we may take action. And this is the case in our 2023 fine of TikTok for processing under 13's personal information. But in most cases, if the UK company is compliant in the UK, we would hope that they would be compliant overseas. It doesn't always happen, but it's up to the domestic law of that other organization to make sure that, or that other data protection authority to ensure that those laws are followed. The ICO does, however, talk to other data protection authorities, and we share intelligence with other data protection authorities that we have a memorandum of understanding with. So this allows us to work collaboratively with, so for example, the Office of Privacy Commissioner of Canada, the OAIC in Australia, for example. In those cases, any investigations or processing with in our partner countries would be undertaken by the partner data protection authority.
Great. Thank you, Michael. One thing that really stands out is that VPN usage jumped by over 1,400% when age verification came into force last July. It shows how quickly users adapt to bypass controls. From your perspective, how should organizations be adapting their age verification strategies, given that people are actively trying to get around them?
Well, start off with saying we don't know what that 1,400% change relates to, and whether that's from a very low bar with some certain companies or not. So Ofcom and the ICO are aware of the public debate about how VPNs may be used by children to bypass online safety protections and age assurance measures that services have put in place to meet their obligations. We're working together to explore the issue, to try to understand the evidence base behind it, to understand the impacts on people's online safety and privacy since the OSA age checks came into force. There are many legitimate reasons why people may want to use a VPN. For example, they can offer significant privacy and security benefits, such as encrypting internet traffic and making it more difficult for companies to track them online. They can act as additional safeguards, providing further protections for people's online experiences. So we shouldn't forget the benefits that VPNs have in this space. However, organizations should remember that they continue to have responsibilities under the OSA and under the UK GDPR to have accurate and effective age assurance. Contravention, whether that's a VPN use or other methods of contravention, should be something that they consider and discuss with their age assurance providers. Ian's organization, the AVPA, has done some useful work on this, so I'd recommend services take a look at Ian's briefing for how they can reduce their risk of VPN use and to help them continue to comply with the online safety and data protection law in the UK and overseas.
Thank you very much, Michael. So let's move over to you, Ellen. As someone who is in the cold face of these changes through the consultative work you do with customers, How ready are organizations for these requirements, and what growth are you seeing in the age verification industry?
Thank you, Sofia. So in addition to our consulting work in this space, we are active with the publication of analyst reports, including our partnership with Biometric Update, where we collaborated on a market and buyer's guide with them. Earlier this year, we published a study examining UK age assurance, where we found that as a result of the Online Safety Act, affected organizations were already taking significant steps to implement age assurance technology that aligned with the regulators' technology recommendations. And since July, deployment of age assurance solutions has greatly accelerated, in particular for the adult content industry. Figures published by the age assurance solutions providers have seen a rapid increase in adoption, with popular digital and identity and age assurance apps constantly appearing at the top of the leaderboard in the both Google and Apple Play stores. And the AVPA has also published figures on this, saying an additional 5 million age checks are being conducted daily on adult content websites since the OSA rules became mandatory. And that so it's definitely seeing the uptick in age checks as a result of regulation. It's and we reckon that these figures are just for the UK and for adult services. So we expand into other regions and in other sectors, including age-restricted goods, social media, entertainment, and gambling, and gaming, for instance. The potential growth for age verification services rises significantly. Thank you.
Great. In your opinion, do you think there are sectors that are a lot more equipped than others? How does readiness vary between social media platforms, gaming companies, adult content providers, and e-commerce?
Yeah, the emphasis has been on the adult sector, and the focus of the attention has been on that sector. So this is not just for specialist adult content providers, but also with popular social media and video platforms. The focus will switch to other sectors, including gaming and also for e-commerce. And there is a potential use in physical retail as well to automate age assurance here.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. Let's move now to Tom. Tom, Shufti has built a strong reputation in fraud prevention, particularly in synthetic identity detection and deepfake prevention. In the age assurance space, attempts to bypass solutions often succeed by exploiting weaknesses in liveness detection. How does Shufti's deep expertise in identity fraud prevention give you an edge in building age verification technology to stop these sophisticated bypass techniques while maintaining both privacy protection and a seamless user experience?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. So I think worth stating, first of all, that there are a number of very effective ways to prove age, and Ian very helpfully lists many of those, and Shufti indeed provides a range of those mechanisms that fit our clients and their consumers' needs for doing that. But look, I'll focus on my comments here on our biometric age estimation, so look at your face and estimating your age, and also our document verification checks, where the technology behind our facial biometric checking and our document verification is really critical to that. As I was thinking about this, there's a song you might recognize the words for, where people say, I don't care how you get here, just get here if you can. But actually the reality is we've seen people come from like the identity side and people come from the age estimation side. And actually I think it really does matter which side you came from, because to big up Shufti to some extent, if you came from the age estimation side, we genuinely see when we do tests and penetration checks on our some of our peers and competitors, those solutions are honestly trivially bypassed sometimes, that the liveness and penetration injection attacks simply aren't there. So they might be a good age estimation tool, but if you can effectively present a video, a YouTube image, a clip to that algorithm, you're getting a very accurate estimation of not the person who's trying to access the content. And so I really do think where you came from matters here. And we came from a site of, or perspective of working in some very challenging markets and areas that are very prone to fraud, and we've developed extremely sophisticated capabilities to spot attempts to inject videos into our stream, to put deepfakes in front of us, and those gives us very sophisticated and effective defenses. So I think we're on to now our V3 of our deepfake solutions, and we can spot 99% of deepfakes presented to our capabilities, and that means by the time you layer up the other defenses, we are genuinely keeping people out. And I thought Michael or Ian, sorry, I forget, the fact that investigations have already been opened into people not having effective solutions is interesting, because as someone who champions effective solutions, I worry that to some extent anyone with any solution will not be asked to use effective solutions. But the fact that the Ofcom has come in quite hard and fast on this gives me hope that effective solutions will be used, and those are the types of solutions that Shufti is trying to put out there.
Well, thank you, Tom. So we can say that, well, as we were pointing out before, readiness varies by sector, but the momentum is growing, right? Creating both compliance pressure and also business opportunity when it comes to the solutions you were talking about. So that takes me to another question, and this goes for Ian. Ian, following on from a customer's viewpoint on balancing user experience, privacy and compliance, there's considerable misinformation about age assurance requirements in the market. What would you say are the most persistent myths you're hearing, and how organizations can separate fact from fiction?
Thanks, Sofia. And this question gives me an opportunity to respond, if I may, a little bit to what Tom was just saying. But let's just pick out a few of the sort of the myths that I've been hearing. I mean, first of all, people always suggest that age verification is leading to the creation of honeypots of data. So there are, when you do an age verification, you're putting yourself at risk of not only being identified, so that perhaps the adult website you're going to finds out who you are, but also that somebody can track which adult website you've gone to, and then they've got a long list of the websites that you might be particularly interested in associated with your name and identity. Now, age verification is not identity verification, first of all. So we simply tell people yes or no, are you over 18 or not? So that should protect you from the website knowing who you are. And we're increasingly moving towards a solution which is double blind, where the information that you are over 18 is transmitted in such a way that it's impossible for the provider who checked your age to know which website you're visiting. Now, this is quite complicated, because we do like to charge for our services, and if we're not allowed to know who's using them, it's very difficult to send them an invoice. So we have to create ecosystems that allow us to do that. We've done that through an interoperability solution called Age Aware, which will tally the number of times your age check is used by a particular platform, but at the same time doesn't allow the providers to know individually, where you are visiting online when you prove your age. Another thing is just around some of these easy ways around the technology. I can't speak for people outside of our trade association, but we did look very quickly at some of the reported circumventions at the time the age verification came in the UK. So there's one around using avatars. Basically, it was a PlayStation 5 game, and because it allowed you to control the animated character, you could make it do all the things we use to check you were a real person. So you could tell the avatar to look to the left and look to the right and to open its mouth. However, when we dug into that a bit more, we found out that the site, the platform rather than the AV provider, had allowed users to try as many times as they like to get around their facial age estimation. So it's what we call a hill climb attack, where you give the hacker effectively the ability to use trial and error and to try lots of different ways of getting around your protections. And so obviously that was and this was a common problem we had, where the age verification providers generally had very good technology, as Shufti does and others do, to detect these attacks, but they were allowing their clients to turn off some of those controls. There was a similar situation with document authentication. So people were able to download really quite poor fake IDs. There was one of the Prime Minister, you could get his driver's license. It didn't even look like a British driver's license, but it was getting through for one of the social media platforms, a sort of discussion website. And we couldn't understand why, because they were using a very good quality provider, but in discussions with the provider, the client had asked them to turn off that authentication. So this clearly has created some issues for us, and we're now trying to insist that our members have to be very, very clear with their clients that if they don't use the full scope of services, then they're not going to be compliant with the regulation. There's also the VPN fallacy. I might just come back to that as well. That because people can pretend to be anywhere they like in the world, it's therefore impossible to regulate the internet. First of all, I don't think any government can accept that position, because it essentially says we're going to abdicate applying the rule of law online, which is we're just going to say, oh, it's impossible to do, so we're just not going to do it. That clearly can't be an answer that's acceptable to government. And what we've suggested really is that when you are subject to age verification rules, you need to monitor traffic from VPNs. It's very easy to spot VPN traffic, and then look for clues that traffic may be coming from a regulated jurisdiction, which might be through the currency or the time zone set on the browser, or the content you're interested in, or the time of day you use it. And then if you are sort of red flagged as being likely to be in one of these jurisdictions, only then are you asked to either prove you are not in that jurisdiction by doing a geolocation, turning on access to your GPS, for example, or you simply do an age check. But that should allow us to sort of refine the number of people who are getting around to the requirements using a VPN. And I do agree with Tom, we can't have this race to the bottom. We do need to set a minimum standard. We've sort of informally adopted 95% as the requirement in the UK for highly effective age assurance. Ofcom won't give us a figure, but we were worried that without a figure, everybody would make their own mind up, and you might find a well-known adult site come forward and say, wow, we're stopping 70% of kids getting onto our site. Isn't that highly effective? And because nobody has said any different, they might get away with it. So we're now certifying our members at that 95% level, which effectively for an 18 plus requirement means that no more than 5% of 16 or 17-year-olds should be able to sneak through that. So yeah, those are a few of the issues we've been dealing with. Some teething issues, as you would expect. By the way, there will be new ways of attacking the system. People will find ways around it. AI is a very powerful tool, and we're going to have to continuously be on our toes to spot when those attacks are happening and close off those vectors of attack.
Oh, thank you, Ian. Well, that reminds me of an article on the BBC that said that a fifth of children use fake age on social media because it is so easy. Well, it was so easy to lie. So a newly released survey conducted by the UK media regulator indicates that 22% of 8 to 17-year-old lie that they are 18 or over on social media apps. This is despite the Online Safety Act requiring platforms. And these alarming findings show that tech firms have lots to do to meet this legal standard, and said they would face enforcement action if they fail to do so. So that takes me with Michael.
Sofia, can I just step in there and just say, one of the problems with that is if somebody pretends that they're over 13 when they're only 10, you might not think it's the end of the world that they're getting a TikTok account or a Snapchat account a few years earlier. But it also means that TikTok and Snapchat then assume that they've turned 18 when they might still only be 15. So you have this problem of it's just compounded all the way up. And I think that's why we find a lot of teenagers are registered as if they're over 18, because when they were actually lying when they were 8, 9, or 10 to get on in the first place. So it is important that we start to apply age assurance at 13 if that's the minimum age under the terms and conditions, which is a requirement of the Online Safety Act, and it's a requirement in the US and other jurisdictions as well, that people follow their terms and conditions. So these probably when you lie, it has this sort of knock-on effect as you get older.
Right. Well, I recently heard also that Instagram was considering to create teen accounts because there was also some safety issues in the past, because some content related to harm, it was harmful content that have led also in the past, not so good effect on children or people under 18. So if we go back to these enforcement actions that I was mentioning before, I have a question for Michael. Michael, with both Ofcom and the ICO actively enforcing regulations, what would you say is the biggest compliance gap you're seeing that could land organizations in immediate trouble?
I'll start off by, I can't speak for Ofcom, but I'll try to guess what they would say in this case. I think we've mentioned the VPN issue. The Ofcom rightly would be concerned if online services was essentially marketing VPNs as a way to get around the Online Safety Act requirements. So Ofcom's been really clear that they will take action on any service that does that. I think the other issues that they're looking at more likely would be about those services, especially the adult services who fail to put highly effective age assurance in place. Overall, I think the progress since July 25th has been substantial, and we can even see that in our statistics that show how many 15 to 17-year-olds are on adult sites, for example. Those numbers have dropped, or how much time they're spending on those sites, and those have dropped significantly as well, showing that potentially they're only able to get to the landing page and not deep into the site and seeing some of the harmful content. So I think overall the impact of the OSA coming online and the 25th of July AV Day, so to speak, has been significant, and the whole sector, the IANS members and Ofcom, should be very proud of what they've achieved to date. From a data protection perspective, Ian's kind of answered some of this. He's taken my thunder to a degree, so shame on Ian. But I think one thing that kind of relates to what Tom was saying is around, and what Ian was saying about services not using the full capabilities of the age assurance providers that are using them. That is a choice by that service not to put in place the most effective, most state-of-the-art form of age assurance. And that could potentially get services in trouble with their accountability obligations under the UK GDPR or under the GDPR in general in Europe. From the ICO's perspective, the changes that have happened since July for the 18 plus, the prevention of young people from seeing adult services or harmful pornography content or very harmful other content, has been great. But as Ian noted, those protections haven't necessarily been put in place for the children that might be 13 plus, or even the children, as you mentioned, Sofia, that are younger than 13 that are getting access to many of these services. We clearly don't want children accessing porn, but we also don't want children being bombarded with behavioral advertising. We don't want them seeing content that is not appropriate for them if they're under 13. We don't want services to be processing under 13's data when they don't have a lawful basis to do so, according to the terms of service. So from the ICO's perspective, what we're seeing is still a lot of companies in that sort of, for that under 18 age brackets, whether that's 13 in the UK, US, or 16 in Ireland, for example, still using self-declaration as their primary form of what they call age assurance. But we know it's not age assurance. It's just kind of asking a kid to make up a date. Some children might be honest, but from our own research, we know that children and often parents are complicit in not giving the accurate age. And Ian's already talked about some of the harms that can come of that. So from a compliance perspective and a regulatory perspective, we are clear that a service who says that they're not appropriate for under 13s or not appropriate for under 18s, if they're processing the data of those children, are doing so in a way that's not data minimization. So the Garante was really clear when it comes to AI. If a service is 18 plus, teenagers should not be allowed on. Processing of the data would be in breach of the data minimization principle of the UK GDPR. Those breaches can relate to Article 6 around lawful basis, or transparency breaches. They can be Article 25, it can be automatic decision-making breaches. There's quite a few areas of the GDPR where there is a potential problem when you allow people onto service that shouldn't be there, or that your own service says they shouldn't be there. Looking forward, Ofcom and ICO are working together on joint statements. We already released 2 on how we work together. There will be another one coming in January that talks a lot more about this minimum age requirement and how both the ICO's data protection remit and Ofcom's online safety remit relate to that minimum age. So that's at the moment we're seeing the biggest problem, and where the ICO is focusing on is that in the UK on the 13 age gate, which we see with the TikTok fine, and which we've announced today, an investigation into Media Lab and Imgur, for example. So that's where the compliance problems for us are the ones that we want to focus on.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And for companies still figuring this out, what should they prioritize? Can you share with your audience your expert insights on what's advisable?
Yeah, it goes back to that same issue that Ian identified. You need to know if a children is on your service. So you need to do that for Ofcom's purposes as well as for the ICO's purposes. So let's start with completing your child access assessment, your risk assessment, and the DPIAs to confirm the level of risk and how you're mitigating those risks to children. Should the risks be high for children, start the process of improving your age assurance measures so you're not relying on self-declaration alone, or decide to apply the standards of the ICO's Children's Code to all users. So set high default settings for things like data sharing, privacy, turn advertising off by default, turn behavioral profiling off by default. Now, we know a lot of the services won't want to do that, so they're going to rely on age assurance. So age assurance must be implemented in a way that respects privacy and complies with data protection law. So both age assurance providers and online services have responsibilities when putting these systems in place. Has the provider been certified with an ICO approved age assurance certification scheme, for example? This will give the audience, the user, a useful barometer that of the GDPR compliance of that service and its quality assurance. So how do you put in place a system that promotes accuracy, transparency, and security while protecting users' personal information? These are the questions you should be asking yourself. These are what should be answered in your DPIA, which you are legally obliged to do, and should be discussed with your age assurance provider as well, so that the data processing for both your service and for the age assurance processing are aligned, and the risks are mitigated in both of those elements.
Thank you, Michael. You were mentioning before that one of the most common gaps is that, well, companies are not using the full capabilities that age verification providers offer. So what would you tell those companies to avoid this gap?
The companies are accountable for the decisions they make. If their decision to turn off a lot of the features that prevent children getting through, whether that's the contraindicators that they would show, Ian's already given some examples of that. If it's a choice of the service not to have those, then that provider's probably making the comply with the law. Whether that's highly effective age insurance probably is no longer highly effective age insurance if you're not putting it in place effectively. So the Ofcom talks about having highly effective, but it also talks about 4 other major issues or elements of it, and robustness of the age assurance is one of the things that they will consider. So I would really strongly recommend that services, if they're going to invest in age assurance, and they should, that they do so in a way that's going to protect children, that's going to protect themselves, and is going to ensure that the service is delivered in a way that it was intended.
Okay, well, Michael, talk us about the ICO certification you have referred to. What elements do you look at, and is the rule of thumb that any organization that caters to minors should have one?
The ICO certification has worked with the Age Check certification scheme, which is a UK-based company that does testing of age assurance. They worked with us to create a number of certification schemes, one of which covers the wider sort of age-appropriate design code and whether service is likely to be conforming to that code. The second certification scheme is specifically around age assurance for age assurance providers, and I don't have the most up-to-date figures, but I believe it's about 14 or 16 organizations have gone through that age check certification scheme. To qualify to go through that, ACCS will work with the provider to look to see how their processing complies with the GDPR. So if you're a company looking for a service that you can rely on, or that is more likely to be compliant, that might be one of the things you should consider, is looking to see whether that insurance provider has been certified, whether it's registered in the UK with the ICO, for example. Those are just a couple of things that could be useful.
Well, thank you. Those are very useful tips for companies that are still figuring these requirements out. And well, then, Ian, you made such an interesting point earlier, which highlights something that might seem negligible at first. And you mentioned that, well, age verification can have a ripple effect and eventually lead to much bigger issues over time, right? So from your experience with the Age Verification Providers Association, how do you think small loopholes or overlooked aspects in age verification can snowball into larger challenges for the industry?
Yeah, interesting question. I think one concern I might have is, yes, there were some people who slipped through various loopholes when we went live in the UK, and you wouldn't want them to now have like a lifetime pass as being, an adult when they're not. So one thing the regulations in the UK don't do, but some other jurisdictions are very specific on, is to set a requirement for regular re-verification. Now, we're not suggesting you should have to do that on a daily basis, but maybe once a year you should have to do a fresh age check just to remove any of that fraud and error from the system. And then maybe more frequently, you should have to prove that it is still you sitting at your keyboard or on your device. We call that authentication. So you wouldn't be proving your age again. You'd just be proving that it's still you, perhaps with a Face ID on your phone or a PIN number or a password, depending on how strict you wanted to be about that. And then another area of potential abuse, which could grow into a problem, I think, is some federated logins, as we call them. So there are some of the larger adult sites that have created their own sort of intermediary age verification solution, where you still do an independent age verification to that. But once you've then got some credentials, a username and password, they're hoping you'll use that same username and password to log into multiple other sites in future, and they'll never have to come back and pay for another age verification again. But I don't know how we stop people handing out that username and password in the playground to all their friends who are 15 or 16, and suddenly everybody's just using that one account to reaccess, because it doesn't have the same degree of authentication as I've just described, checking it's still you, that is available if you're going through an actual age verification provider on each occasion. So yeah, I think we just need to be very vigilant about where there are gaps in the regulations, and I would also like to see, frankly, Michael's mentioned some of the audit schemes. I do think we should move to having a requirement for a third-party audit and certification for age assurance services, not only to check the accuracy, but also to give people more confidence in the data protection and the data security. The ICO does a great job, but they tend to act, they have to act after the fact. They come in after the data is lost and do the investigation and find people, but the damage is already done. And I do understand in a very sensitive area that we need to build trust. And so I think it's great that there are these schemes available. And I would like the regulator, obviously we'd have to see how things go, but I think it should be a high priority for their review of the regulations and how it's working, as to whether we want to move to requiring certification, whether you're doing it in-house or through a third party, I would say. So equally, just to demonstrate that you are behaving properly in terms of that data minimization and privacy by design.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. And that takes me to another question, and this one is for Ellen. Because when we are talking about all of these issues, and that companies might face significant penalties and reputational risks associated with non-compliance, the organizations need to make informed decisions when selecting age verification providers, right? So whether they're procuring the services for the first time or upgrading existing solutions, what criteria, other than the ones that Michael already mentioned, should organizations prioritize?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it chimes with some research that we did earlier this year with biometric updates. We looked at the UK, the market, UK age assurance here, but we're actually updating it to cover the global market as well. But we identified 8 key criteria that buyers could look at when evaluating age assurance products. And just to say, I put a rider on that as well. This was specifically for biometric-based age assurance. So this is kind of mainly on the face age estimation tools that are available. So number one, will it comply with regulation? And as we discussed, it can be a little bit tricky to see whether it is, compliant or not. But I think that that's the number one, to check with the regulator in terms of that. And Australia has just obviously published some very, very interesting kind of research into kind of the suitability and the accuracy of some age assurance technology that I think will probably turn into some sort of benchmark for the industry, I think. But also cost, and we're mainly talking about a transactional fee here. So, does it meet your budget? Have you sized it? Do you know how many age checks do you think you'll be doing? Is that going to fit in with your budget? So I think that's a very obvious one, but it's one that should be looked at. And both Michael and Ian have talked about kind of certification and standards, and that's important. So accuracy and reliability. Is it a certified, tested product? standards help ensure that age verification processes are reliable, secure, and effective in protecting children from accessing age-sensitive content. So, and Ian's mentioned the latest standards, which include obviously IEEE, BSI PAS, and the ISO ISE standards. And also from a biometric perspective, does it meet biometric liveness standards? So biometric liveness is an essential part. It's interesting what Ian said about kind of like some service providers perhaps switching off certain aspects of a product. And we've seen some where a biometric supplier may be bundling in liveness detection as part of the product. Some people are actually kind of turning it off because they believe that may add a little bit of friction to the process. So, you know, biometric liveness standards are there. Does it meet standards and the testing? And we see privacy, data protection compliance. Michael's mentioned that. Does it meet EU GDPR or other kind of local regional standards for data protection? Security. Does the supplier have cybersecurity certifications and adhere to cybersecurity guidance, best practice? At a base level for the UK, that's UK Cyber Essentials. Does it meet your specific usability requirements? The ability to fit in with your usability requirements is a very important consideration when choosing an age verification, age assurance supplier. And also integration. Check whether the solution can be easily integrated into existing systems and workflow. So they're the kind of the basic 8 that we identified earlier this year.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. So this has been a very insightful conversation, and we are running out of time. And we have some questions from the audience and some of the comments that I am going to quickly review. We have here, well, regulating on the internet is difficult, VPNs, but that doesn't mean countries can't abdicate their responsibility to enforce the rule of law. So thank you, Ian. And another one, but this one is from Chinmay Kallinher. As a product strategist and CEO, working at the intersection of AI and digital identity, it's clear that age assurance is no longer just a regulatory necessity, it's an ethical imperative. The insights shared at AI Assurance in Practice highlight the critical role AI plays in creating scalable, privacy-preserving, and globally adaptable solutions. So we all agree here that this is a very important issue today. And well, Shufti has done a commendable job bringing this conversation to the forefront. As AI continues to evolve, our collective challenge is ensuring that age verification systems are not only intelligent, but also inclusive, transparent, and resilient against bias. So these are some of the comments from our audience. And wow,
look, I get, if I can, Sofia, like I'd kind of chip in a bit to kind of respond to some of those things, because I think that bias point is an important one, right? And I think Shufti is a hugely global company that we process documents that have come from something like 220 jurisdictions kind of each and every month. And whilst we all have aspirations of low bias, I was really pleased when we've done the testing on this that we see low bias across different racial groups and enablement for really everyone to come on board. And that's certainly something that Shufti pushes. So I was kind of reflecting a little bit like what's my list of things that I would expect providers to be able to do, and I think that ability to kind of look at measure and consider bias is a critical one. And a lot of AI algorithms are, at least on the surface, somewhat sort of sexist and racist to perhaps exaggerate, but it is the truth that as I'm a white man and that AI algorithms tend to treat me quite well. I was really pleased to see that the Shufti algorithms really are commendably flat across racial groups. But I think maybe let me kind of plug a few other things that maybe I think as kind of red or things that you need to ask your vendor if you're assessing this. So some things that we've seen is kind of recent attacks. So kind of high resolution screens. So actually, like iPhone screens or iPad screens are really good now, or indeed the monitor that I'm using now is pretty good, and actually kind of traditional screen defenses to protect you are no longer good enough. So you do need to check that, because otherwise you get what Ian was talking about, which is computer game characters being used, or video replays are able to get past these things. Deepfakes are pretty good, and actually if you go and generate a deepfake, I'll give you my tip. The way to do it to get rid of the metadata is you want to do a screenshot and then take that image and paste it out, and that gets rid of most of the metadata. That will fox a lot of solutions that just look for the metadata that says generated by ChatGPT.
Tom, which side are you on?
Yeah. Which side am I on?
You're giving tips on how to get around it.
Well, I mean, like, people know this, right, Ian? So, but I think, like, we do have to get people who are able to peer past the just checking the metadata thing, right? And actually, okay, and another trivial one is the detect images from the internet. Like, there is a bit of forehead slapping when I go on major forums and people are saying, how do I get around this? And people say, oh, if you search for UK driver's license and upload it, it'll go straight through. I mean, it's a bit hair-raising, a little bit of what's gone through. So look, you do need to ask these questions. We at Shufti are doing more to move stuff onto device. I mean, a little bit to what's raised, that has some trade-offs, that the more is on device, it becomes more challenging then to spot the recurrent attacks, and you perhaps need to consider where to move the needle, and that might even be a dynamic thing, as long as consumers are informed as to what you're doing. So yeah, it's an exciting space, but I think it's one where I really do hope that some of the work in you're doing and so on, that we make sure that kind of quality drives out, quality wins overall.
And can I also add in there that we're really keen to see that everybody recognize that there's no one solution that works all the time in all circumstances, and that giving people a choice of how you prove your age still is really important, because not everybody will have access to all the same documents. So a selection of methodologies that might use new technologies, as well as things like facial estimation, could be useful depending on the circumstances of the service. So we'd be looking to see, for example, how you might integrate email age estimation or checks against an electoral roll, different ways that you can capture different people depending on the age group you want to work with. But overall, we think that it can be done. The Australian trial showed it can be done. But that we just need to bear in mind this need for transparency and choice to keep the service users on board and comfortable with going through the age-appropriate assurance system.
I think that's really important, Michael, and I think what we do in our solutions is try to provide a range of really easily accessible solutions, because actually, and that's partly what stops people compromising the thresholds on their age estimation, if you can provide other workable solutions for younger persons to still pass solutions. So 100% agree with that.
And that also helps with bias, of course, that if you're not stuck with just one solution, which might have a degree of inevitable bias, you can go to an alternative solution which allows you to prove your age correctly. And my final thought would be, we don't want this to become the new cookie pop-up with, due respect to Michael, because I won't hold him responsible for cookie pop-ups, but it's part of his department. We do need to find a way of making this very simple and easy from a user's perspective, and allow for this interoperable and reusable tokenized solution, which we'll be bringing out very shortly.
Well, thank you to our expert panelists for this insightful session. We're reaching the end of this webinar, and unfortunately we won't have time to cover all of the questions we had planned. However, I believe today's discussion has provided valuable insight into how the industry is evolving to meet the age verification requirements. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and also I would like to thank our expert panelists. And well, and at the same time, I'd like to express sincere gratitude to the Age Verification Providers Association and Good Intelligence for its partnership with Shufti on this important discussion. And to our attendees, we hope you enjoyed this session and are feeling better prepared to create your own thriving digital ecosystem in terms of age verification. And for those who want to stay ahead, please visit shufti.com to sign up for updates and access future resources. And for myself, Shufti and AVPA, well, thank you and goodbye until the next industry webinar.